48th session of the Human Rights Council. I would like to first thank the co-sponsoring states and civil society organizations and thank everyone for taking the time to join our event and of course our speakers today. The event will address the urgency for the international community to work towards enhancing accountability and strengthening accountability in Yemen, including through the establishment of a criminally based accountability mechanism. In its 2020 report to the Human Rights Council, the GE stressed the need for the establishment of a criminally based investigation body to conduct further investigations and prepare case files to be shared with relevant prosecutorial authorities. The world has watched as Yemen was torn apart and devastated, and the war devastated its people. Impunity for war crimes and other violations of international law have fueled the conflict, creating the world's largest man-made humanitarian catastrophe. As Yemen enters its 7th year of war, the warring parties continue to commit serious violations, and the fate of millions rests upon, in part, whether or not the international community will heed the recent calls of the UN group of eminent experts to take adequate steps to address this pandemic of impunity. I will now give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Representative of Luxembourg, Mr. Luc Dockendorf, who will present the introductory remarks. Thank you, Luc.
Many thanks, Nada, and many thanks also to the Cairo Institute and all the organizing NGOs for this very important event on behalf of the missions of Belgium, Ireland, Netherlands, and my own Luxembourg. It's an honor to be with you for this important discussion today about bridging the accountability gap for Yemen. And I want to extend our particular thanks to Professor Adi Imzais and his fellow experts of the Eminent Experts Group for their most recent report, and indeed all of their ongoing work. It is clear to the core group members that we need to do everything that we can to strengthen the GEE's mandate and enable it to do its difficult job under the best possible conditions. And we believe, and we've shared this already at the discussion at the Human Rights Council, that a 2-year mandate and also adequate resourcing and staffing of the GEE Secretariat would help the experts to better fulfill their role. This is in everybody's role, in everybody's interest. This conflict is very complex, and the Human Rights Council needs the best possible information, and the experts need the best possible conditions to do their job. And that's a message to anyone who criticizes the group of eminent experts. They're doing an admirable job in what are almost impossible conditions. So we call on all parties to the conflict to cooperate fully with the group of eminent experts, but also all other UN human rights mechanisms to grant them safe passage and access, and also reform from any form of reprisals against those who cooperate with them. For Luxembourg, but also the other core group members, it's important to hear the point of view of the distinguished civil society representatives that we'll hear from in a moment now on the very important issue of accountability. Accountability for the massive human rights violations and abuses, but also violations of international humanitarian law that we are seeing in Yemen on an almost daily basis, or on a daily basis actually. And these include arbitrary deprivation of life, enforced disappearances and arbitrary detention, gender-based violence, including sexual violence, torture and other forms of cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, recruitment of and use of children in hostilities, and the use of starvation as a method of warfare. Women and children have suffered disproportionately, while journalists, human rights defenders, and persons belonging to minority groups have been particularly targeted for harassment and attacks. It's now up to the Human Rights Council to step up to the plate and ensure that there is accountability for these crimes and atrocities committed against the people of Yemen who have suffered for much too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these introductory remarks. And of course, we totally agree that accountability is imperative to any progress towards peace, stability, and justice in Yemen. I would like to now turn to Dr. Adi Imzais, who is an assistant professor of law, at the Faculty of Law of Queen's University. He is member of the core group of eminent international regional experts on Yemen. Between 2002 and 2014, he served in senior legal and policy capacities with the UN in the Middle East, UNRWA and UNHCR, and is former senior legal counsel to the Chief Justice of Alberta. I give you the floor, Dr. Erde.
Neda, thank you so very much for that very generous introduction. I should like to begin by thanking in particular the NGO partners and the states who have helped organize today's event and for inviting me to address you on behalf of the group of eminent experts. Most importantly, however, I'd like to begin by paying tribute to the noble people of Yemen, the very proud people of Yemen. Despite the unbearable toll they've been made to suffer in recent years, it is their steadfastness and their will to survive in the face of untold deprivations that reaffirms, for all of us, in my respectful view, what truly matters in life. The Yemeni people teach us life through their toil. Dear friends, after 4 years of investigating and reporting to the world on the situation in Yemen, the group of experts has arrived at the conclusion that Yemen is a nation abandoned. As we noted in the council yesterday, by all objective accounts, Yemen has been abandoned to a uniquely cruel fate of seemingly boundless death and destruction, a fate experienced by all sectors of society, most problematically the civilian population, women, children, the elderly, migrants, minorities. If anything has been made clear over the course of the conflict, it's that for all of the high-sounding talk of the need to end it, the parties to the conflict remain unwilling to exercise the necessary political will to do so. And difficult though it may be, a just, inclusive, and sustainable peace is always possible, but only if the parties will that it be so. Just the same, it is axiomatic that there can be no peace without justice. To the great detriment of the people of Yemen, the parties to the conflict have largely remained unwilling or unable to act in this regard. So faced with this intolerable situation, the group is of the view that the international community must act decisively and with purpose. It must find the requisite political will, not only to end the war as soon as possible, resisting political inertia that treats the people of Yemen as an afterthought or a political football in regional geopolitical disputes, but also to take measures to ensure accountability is found immediately and to address the pandemic of impunity afflicting the country. Last year, the group offered 5 recommendations to the international community in this respect. Many of you will be aware of them, but for the benefit of the audience, I will go over them now. And as the situation in Yemen has continued to deteriorate, the group has been compelled to maintain these recommendations this year. We've elaborated upon them this year in the conference room paper that accompanies our 4th report to the Human Rights Council, but they are in summary as follows. First, the United Nations Security Council should immediately refer the situation in Yemen to the International Criminal Court. As you are all aware, the ICC was established to ensure that the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole should not go unpunished, particularly where relevant domestic authorities are unable or unwilling to do so, as is the case in our respectful view with Yemen. The group has reasonable grounds to believe that international crimes have and are being perpetrated in Yemen. As we have repeatedly stated, there is no principled reason at all why the Security Council should not trigger the complementary jurisdiction of the ICC. Second, the Security Council must expand its list of persons subject to sanctions under its Resolution 2140. In principle, this sanctions regime holds great promise. However, so long as only a small number of individuals are on the list, and only from one party to the conflict, this mechanism cannot reasonably be expected to deliver on that promise. Given that the existing criteria under the mechanism allow for designations of individuals on the basis of their involvement in human rights and humanitarian law violations of the sort that the group has documented and investigated, the group continues to encourage members of the Security Council to expand the list. We are of the view that the Security Council must shoulder its burden in this regard. Second, there is a need for the establishment of an independent international investigative mechanism for Yemen with a similar mandate to those established for Syria and Myanmar. Such a body would operate alongside the group and would be empowered to carry out further investigations using criminal justice-focused methodologies and prepare case files to be shared with relevant authorities in the future. Whether at the national, regional, or international levels, no one knows, but the point is that this body should put these case files together for future possible use. I shall be returning to this recommendation in a moment, as I understand it is of some interest to the listeners today. Fourth, third states must investigate war crimes over which they have jurisdiction and, where appropriate, prosecute such crimes. States must also fulfill their duties to prosecute or extradite that arise under international human rights law. Now, the invocation of the domestic jurisdiction of third states is a potential avenue for redress for victims, not least because it is oftentimes at the domestic level that options for individual criminal responsibility and accountability are most robust, so long, of course, as they're consistent with relevant international legal standards. Fifth, in the longer term, Yemeni authorities and the international community should engage in further dialogue about the creation of a special tribunal, such as a hybrid tribunal, to prosecute individuals most responsible for war crimes and other violations. Experiences with such tribunals vary in success, but based on their use in other contexts, such as in Cambodia, Lebanon, Sierra Leone, and Timor-Leste, best practices may be drawn upon and lessons learned going forward for Yemen, if, of course, the conditions become suitable. Allow me to return to the third of our recommendations. As I said before, I know this is of particular interest to participants in this event, namely the establishment of a IIIM type mechanism for Yemen. The group continues to support the establishment of an independent international criminal justice-focused investigative mechanism for Yemen, with a mandate similar to that of the mechanism for Syria. Such a body could consolidate, preserve, and analyze evidence of serious violations of international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and international crimes, and prepare files in order to facilitate and expedite fair and independent criminal proceedings, of course, in accordance with international law standards, either in national, regional, or international courts or tribunals. In the last year, this proposal has gained little traction, but we are heartened that our NGO partners have begun, as well as some states parties, have begun to advocate for it with relevant stakeholders. From what we understand, there may be confusion among some stakeholders as to the respective roles of the group of eminent experts and such a body, and how they would mesh with one another. I should therefore like to clarify the vision behind the group's initial recommendation. In essence, were a IIIM type mechanism to be created, the group would envision it to be complementary to the independent work we do, which would need to continue. The group of eminent experts would continue to play its role in collecting, preserving, and analyzing information relating to violations and potential crimes, and preparing a confidential list of alleged perpetrators. However, this is not a substitute for a mechanism focused on the collection and analysis of evidence and the preparation of case files for potential use in criminal justice investigations and proceedings, whether nationally or internationally. The two types of investigations would use, at least in part, different methodologies and require some distinct staff profiles. The group, for instance, is focused on corroborating and analyzing a range of incidents to demonstrate wider patterns of violations of human rights and humanitarian law, among other relevant applicable international law. It makes a public report concerning its findings annually, thereby keeping Yemen in a broad manner on the international agenda. On the other hand, a criminal justice-focused investigation mechanism would build up a crimes matrix and gather supporting evidence to demonstrate the commission of a crime by particular individuals. While material collected by the group would be useful for that purpose, a criminal justice-focused mechanism would delve further, far deeper, into matters it was examining, for instance, linkage evidence, and it would prepare its files with regard to the higher evidentiary thresholds that must be met in the criminal context beyond a reasonable doubt, as many of your listeners will know. The differences in practice we envision are well reflected in the continued work of both the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic and the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria. I hasten to add that in the group's view, a IIIM type mechanism would not inherently be tied to notions of international justice. The mechanisms for Syria and Myanmar, for instance, have been deliberately designed so their files might be used also by regional and, importantly, national authorities, including third states, provided certain protections, of course, can be guaranteed in line with international legal standards. Creation, therefore, of such a body would not require Security Council action, but instead could be done by the General Assembly or the Human Rights Council, based on practice that we're aware of already in respect of Syria and Myanmar. In light of the potential utility of such a body to practically support future prosecutions at the international, regional, and national levels, the group of eminent experts encourages serious consideration to be given to the establishment of a triple IM mechanism for Yemen. In the meantime, of course, and subject to the renewal of our mandate by the Human Rights Council in the coming days, the group of eminent experts will continue to serve the interests of justice and accountability for the people of Yemen as they are made to bear the burden of this wholly unnecessary, wasteful, and monumentally cruel war. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this important overview on the recommendations by the group of eminent experts on Yemen. I would like now to turn to Ms. Radhia Al-Mutawakkil. She is the co-founder and chairperson of Muwatana for Human Rights. Muwatana is a Yemeni human rights NGO, which advocates for human rights, including through the verification and documentation of violations, the provision of legal support to victims, and advocacy for accountability. Muwatana received several awards and is nominated for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. Radhia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nada. First, I want to thank the states that are standing beside us as civil society in our course for accountability and criminal accountability. And thank you for the group of eminent experts for their continuous great work in spite of all the challenges. And we can see clearly that their reports are taken seriously, not only by states, but also by non-state actors. That means how much it's important to have such a mechanism. But at the same time, the violations by all parties to the conflict in Yemen are still going on, which means that beside the group of eminent experts, we need more. I agree with all the great recommendations that has been said by Ardif, but I will focus in one of them that can be done immediately by the Human Rights Council, which is creating a criminally focused international investigative mechanism. And I don't know why not. So in Muwatana, we have documented, just to let you know, you are maybe familiar with all the suffering that Yemenis are living every day, but just to give you a picture of the continuous of this kind of suffering, from September 2020 to September 21, we have documented in Muwatana hundreds of incidents where many civilians, hundreds of civilians who have been killed and injured or detained or tortured by all parties to the conflict. Like, we documented incidents of airstrikes, landmines, torture, forced disappearance, also denial of humanitarian access, attacking schools and hospitals, and the continuous using starvation as a weapon of war and starving people. We just published with our partners, GRC, our starvation report. It's like, it's called Starvation Makers. In this report, we have tried to make the fact that parties to the conflict are using starvation as a weapon of war to prove it legally, with concentrating in a pattern of violations. So we can prove the pattern and also the intent. We focused in the Saudi and Emirati-led coalition and their airstrikes, and also in Houthis in their landmines, also obstruction of humanitarian aid. It was a very, very difficult work to prove the intent. It was not easy to track the pattern in order to see how these parties to the conflict are participating to starve people in purpose, to make it legally. Through this work, especially this report, it was very clear for us that how much is very difficult to build a document that focuses on criminal accountability. And we have been documenting violations for years, but we have started to think that we should start to build dossiers. It seems like no one is doing this, and it's our responsibility. But I can tell you, it's not like it's only dangerous. It's dangerous. The whole work, our work just put us in the middle of the danger, but it's difficult. It needs capacity. It needs like experience, experts, and also we don't have the mandate that makes all the work we are doing in the ground have the influence that comes out from the international mechanism. So it's honestly not fair to be let alone as a civil society to do this work by ourselves, and we do it because we believe in it. We take the Human Rights Council seriously. We believe that these mechanisms can change the situation and protect civilians, not only now, but even in the future. Parties to the conflict in Yemen, for anyone that goes deeply with their violations, you can see to what extent they don't care. Many of the violations that we have documented are very preventable, and in many of them, most of them, there is no even a military advantage. They do it because they trust impunity more than anything else. I can't say that the whole work that has been done by civil society internally and internationally and the GE didn't make influence, but we still Yemenis are suffering because of the very preventable violations. And therefore, there should be a very serious step towards criminal accountability. And I don't know what should be happening in Yemen, less or more than Syria and Myanmar and other states that where such mechanisms have been created. Why not us waiting? We are all waiting for what? Sometimes I believe that in the Human Rights Council more than the Human Rights Council believe in itself. We ask for these things because it's very important and will make difference. Whether we have been lucky in order to have a sustainable peace soon or not, even among the war, Yemen doesn't have to be the human rights, the worst humanitarian crisis. It happened only because of the lack of accountability. So to protect civilians, even among the war, we need such mechanisms to be working and to send a very clear messages and to take actions. I don't want to wait for the General Assembly to do it, honestly. I think the Human Rights Council, because of the whole work that has been doing inside it for many years, it's prepared for such step more than the General Assembly. So please, I ask the states to take this step and do it. And I ask the US, especially the US, who has been a very negative player inside the Human Rights Council for many years and have a different approach this year to be, not only to ask for the renew for the GE, for the multi-year mandate, because I think these things should be done by default. This is something we should not be even discussed. This should be done. But to push also for criminal focused accountability. Yemen was used a lot in the US elections, and it was mentioned in the first speech of the President Biden. So I expect the US to be very positive regarding this year and to encourage other states to go forward. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Radia, for giving us an overview of your important work in Yemen and the need for this mechanism for your people. I will now move to Afrah Nasser, who is a researcher in the Middle East and North Africa division of Human Rights Watch, investigating humanitarian law violations and human rights abuses in Yemen. Prior to joining Human Rights Watch, she was an activist, independent journalist, and analyst reporting on Yemen's social and political changes for over a decade. Afrah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nada. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much to be in this important panel. I would like to start by thanking the GE team for all their hard work, and actually even like the hardest part is the media appearances, and I can see that they're getting like hard time sometimes. So thank you so much for all the work that I've been doing, and for Muwatana as well. Unfortunately, this is another year of the conflict in Yemen, another year of the unspeakable suffering for the Yemeni population, another report by the GEE without a political will from the international community to ensure meaningful accountability measures for IHL violations by parties to the conflict. with like, I don't know what we should say more. We've said enough, but I think since we're not being heard enough, we should continue repeating till we are heard. As previous speakers in the panel spoke about the different range of violations and abuses committed in Yemen, we think the latest GE report presents the grim status of what civilians in the torture land of Yemen are enduring. So I would like to focus on some of the communication with victims' relatives, Yemeni human rights defenders and survivors across the country who we are in communication with, and who are actually like just yearning for justice and can't wait to see abusers in courts. So whether in our communication with the relatives of arbitrary detainees, like, you know, we have now 4 journalists who are facing unfair detention and facing death penalty. We have, like, you know, an indefinite number of forcible disappeared people, and it's really hard to find to know the exact number. But we have like even humanitarian workers who are witnessing unlawful attacks against IDPs camps. We've published in Human Rights Watch several reports about the attacks, unlawful attacks on IDPs camps in Marib, which is extremely alarming. And you know, in all our communication with the survivors of brutal and inhuman detention conditions, survivors who fled the country after facing restrictions of fundamental freedoms, women survivors of gender-based violence, and in this case, I would like to mention that now we have like Intisar Hamadi, the Yemeni model, who's becoming like the face of the inhuman detention condition and unfair trials, and you know, like what women are also enduring in the conflict in Yemen. African migrants who survived vicious abuses. Just this year, we've witnessed like atrocities committed against African migrants. We've published in Human Rights Watch about the ordeal of dozens of African migrants in the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And also like the center fire in Sana'a, where African survivors just spoke about like really brutal and unimaginable experiences. And the list goes on actually. And they are all like, in our communication, they are all asking us, who can bring justice to me? Can you, Human Rights Watch, bring justice to us? So it's just a very difficult question to answer. As the GE report, the GE team and local and international rights group have shown that Yemen's judiciary system has been severely impacted by the ongoing conflict. So this year, and the GE report, they describe the justice system in Yemen as having deep-seated weaknesses, including compromised levels of judicial independence and politicization, and inadequate victim and witness security, frequent violation of fair trial rights, and gender bias. I mean, the message that we keep getting from survivors of abuses is that there is a lack of access to justice for survivors, and that the epidemic of impunity has given a green light for abusers to commit violations with no hesitation or fear of serious consequences. So just to conclude, as the other speakers in the panel said, we in Human Rights Watch appeal to the international community to take measures to support criminal accountability for those responsible of serious violations. So Human Rights Watch joins calls by NGOs and the GE for A, multi-year mandate, and B, an international criminal justice mechanism. And as Radia mentioned, what should more of catastrophe should happen for the international community to really have the political will to you know, to just be in the right side of history and do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Afra, for highlighting the research on the organization regarding the judiciary and the need for accountability. I will now move to Jahan Pitaluwala, who is a research analyst at the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, monitoring and advocating for populations at risk of mass atrocities in countries such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, Syria and Yemen. She is also the coordinator of the International Coalition for the Responsibility to Protect. Jahan, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nada, and thank you very much to all the organizers and co-sponsors for today's very timely and important event. It's really such a pleasure to be here among all my fellow panelists and colleagues who have actually already covered really crucial ground in terms of the ongoing violations and current needs in Yemen. So I think I'm going to zoom us out just a little bit and clarify and unpack some of the jurisdictional, multilateral, and institutional gaps that really increase the need for the international community to address impunity in Yemen. So as we've heard countless times, pervasive impunity for likely atrocity crimes in Yemen has perpetuated the conflict for more than 6 years and helped facilitate a deadly cycle of violations of international law. The group of eminent experts, the GEE, has characterized Yemen as a pandemic of impunity with an acute accountability gap, concluding that it's the international community who can and should do more to help bridge this gap. But I'd like to answer how exactly this accountability gap persisted for so many years, what dynamics and factors are creating or enabling this gap, and why is it incumbent upon the international community and the Human Rights Council in particular to address it. So currently, there exists really no realistic avenues for justice in Yemen at any level, really. And this is the root of the accountability gap. As Afra just highlighted, there are countless challenges at the national level that impede the capacity of the judiciary. There are a very small number of cases that are pending before the Yemeni judicial system and at Saudi Arabia's courts martial, but this actually only represents a very, very small fraction of instances that deserve judicial consideration. And additionally, despite a previous announcement from the government of Yemen to establish a specialized court that will prosecute human rights violations, there hasn't been any formal action taken on this at all. And there are some deep-seated weaknesses in the justice system that could impede the extent to which such a court from the government of Yemen would be successful in addressing the sheer scale of likely atrocities in Yemen. Meanwhile, cases under universal jurisdiction have not been widely taken up by states. And also, as we've heard before, there is no territorial jurisdiction at the International Criminal Court. Yemen is not a state party to the Rome Statute, nor are other key states that are directly involved in the conflict. And as we've also heard before, it's a referral by the Security Council to the International Criminal Court that would be an easy way to facilitate jurisdiction over likely war crimes and crimes against humanity in Yemen. However, and unfortunately, despite explicit calls from the GEE and civil society, the Security Council has not made any motions. They haven't really demonstrated any willingness or ability to refer the situation in Yemen to the ICC. And this is enabling and deepening the accountability gap. We've also seen that the Security Council has been equally reticent on other aspects related to Yemen. Their own panel of experts called upon the Security Council to have a focused discussion on accountability for violations, and this just simply hasn't taken place. The Security Council has also been unable or unwilling to expand the list of persons subject to sanctions to include all parties responsible for international law violations, despite calls again from the GEE and from civil society. The Security Council, in addition, has not passed a single substantive resolution on the conflict since April 2015 with Resolution 2216. But I mean, of course, the Security Council is not the only relevant actor that sort of comes to our minds when we consider the situation in Yemen. There is their panel of experts on Yemen mandated by the Security Council, and of course, the group of eminent experts mandated by the Human Rights Council. And both of those mandates serve absolutely crucial purposes, but neither of them contribute specifically to the pursuit of criminal accountability. And this is what really institutionalizes the accountability gap. So the panel of experts mandated by the Security Council on the one hand has a mandate to provide relevant reporting related to the Security Council's sanctions regime. Now, targeted sanctions, however disproportionate they may currently be in the Yemeni context, they do serve important, more general accountability functions. But sanctions are not, however, viable substitutes for the pursuit of criminal accountability for likely atrocities. The GEE, on the other hand, is mandated, very importantly, to monitor and publicly report on violations of international law, to promote accountability, and to recommend approaches towards accountability. And in order for these really essential functions of the GE to be, in essence, operationalized by the international community, there must be a complementary, criminally focused mechanism that exists alongside the GEE. And as was eloquently mentioned by Ardi earlier, a mechanism like this would facilitate and expedite and eventually practically support future criminal proceedings at any level, be it national or international. And they would also lay the groundwork for effective redress for victims. It would complement and actively cooperate with existing UN mandated bodies, including the GEE's public reporting mandate. I think I'd like to conclude by perhaps emphasizing that these gaps that I've highlighted and that others have highlighted that currently exist in the pursuit of accountability for Yemen, they're actually nothing new for the international community. The UN has been confronted with this exact conundrum before in Syria and in Myanmar, and member states have garnered the requisite political will before establishing criminally focused mechanisms. Both the IIIM for Syria and the IIMM for Myanmar are sort of, I like to view them as bastions of principled commitment, if you will. They're really signs that whatever challenges, whether they're practical, political, jurisdictional, or structural, they won't prevent the international community from paving the way towards accountability and towards justice for innocent victims of atrocities. It is now, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many of my colleagues, long past time for the international community to garner similar political will and address the widening accountability gap in Yemen and establish a criminally focused mechanism. Hand in hand with a multi-year mandate for the GEE, such a mechanism could really help to finally bring an end to the pervasive impunity that continues to fuel the ongoing catastrophe in Yemen. I think I've spoken for quite some time and it'll be great to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jahan, for providing us with an overview also on the mechanisms that exist on the General Assembly level and in New York, and for showing the complementarity of the different mechanisms. I would like to thank all the speakers for their valuable contributions to the discussion today, and also open the floor for questions. I would like to ask attendants to write questions in the Q&A box that you can find next to the chat and the participants. And I would like to first give the floor to Lynn Marouf from Amnesty International, who wanted to also present on behalf of Amnesty. Can we please open the microphone for Lynn? Lynn, can you speak?
Am I unmuted?
Yeah,
I can.
I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I wanted to thank everyone and the panelists who just spoke. very eloquently and driving the message very strongly for the need to take this one step further. It is inconceivable that every year we are having the same discussion about how to take ourselves from where we are at today in terms of documenting violations to actually delivering and the pathways to accountability. This is, as panelists have been saying, it's been almost 6 years. The suffering is unfathomable. It will continue as long as prosecutions are not, as long as the prospect of prosecutions aren't there. As Amnesty International, we obviously continue to fully support the mandate of the GEE, call for its renewal in a sustainable manner, but we are also calling on the international community to give substance and meaningfulness to the GEE's setup and creation by taking seriously and putting into action its own recommendations to the member states of the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Lene. I would like to ask maybe a question to start with, and see who would like to answer from the panel. The question is, what effect will lack of effective accountability on Yemen have on international law standards more generally?
Thank you for that question. I wonder if I might have an opportunity to offer an answer before I hand it over to others. As many of your listeners will know, compliance with international law at the international legal level is always a challenge. Unlike law at the municipal level or the domestic level, at the international level, enforcement of international law is not vested in the hands of any single centralized body. It's more diffuse, and that's why international law, for the most part, relies on voluntary compliance by states and other actors with their obligations under international law. There is a general skepticism in the world, in certain places, about the import of international law because it can be violated, or so it would seem, so readily by states and by others, other actors who wish to violate it when that suits their interests. In general terms, I'm of the opposite view. Most international laws are followed most of the times. But if international law is not able to be brought to bear, particularly from an accountability standpoint, in a situation so egregiously requiring it, right? So very clearly in need of it, as Yemen, but also in other places, then serious questions are rightfully placed at the doorstep of the United Nations, at the doorstep of member states of the United Nations, at the doorsteps of the principal international organizations that focus on accountability, whether judicial or otherwise, on whether or not international law even matters. The multilateral international legal order does matter a great deal because it gives us stability, order, predictability in international life. But if the people of Yemen can't have their day, then this is just one more, if you like, chink in the larger armor of the great strides we've made as humans since World War II to establish this rules-based international order. If it's not good for the people of Yemen, then it might very well end up on our doorsteps as well one day, wherever we may be. And then who will advocate for us? As a matter of principle, we owe the people of Yemen a universal application of international law, and the group of eminent experts will continue down that path to advocate for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Razia, please go ahead. And then we have a question also from Rory from the public.
Okay, I just want to say that the lack of effective accountability has already created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's not only the war who created this crisis, it's the lack of accountability. So to continue not having this effective mechanism, it means that more children are dying and starving, more people are suffering. So it's like, I feel jealous sometimes because the states, they have in their hands like the decision to make the situation better, and they just don't use it. And it's not, I mean, these mechanisms are not like a magic stick. We know this. The GEE was not a magic stick, but I can tell you that the GEE made difference. We can feel it like from like a civil society in the ground. It's not that Yemenis are not still suffering, but it made difference. So just strengthening these mechanisms will make it a very effective, and go to the next step, which is the criminal accountability, will make a difference. For now, it's like very urgent, will make the situation much better. I know parties to the conflict in Yemen, they do care about these international mechanisms, and it will just protect the future in all conflict zones.
Can I just add, like really briefly, like something I like very often reflect on in our documentation of violations and abuses is that what if we don't document them? Like at least like that act is forbidding more catastrophes to come. At least for the warlords, the abusers, knowing that there are people watching them and documenting, that somehow is preventing more violations from happening. So ideally, it would be perfect if the international humanitarian and human rights laws are respected, but I very often think like it would absolutely give them like a free access to do anything they want if we don't watch them and document. So that, like, at the minimum level, at least gives me hope.
Thank you very much. Can we please open the microphone for Rory to intervene?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I just want to very briefly make a comment. It's not a question. Just to thank you and our NGO colleagues for organizing this session today. As you know, Canada is also a member of the Yemen Resolution Core Group. So I also want to sincerely thank the panelists today for the very interesting conversation, and say that I hope that we can continue to work together to pursue meaningful accountability in this session and in future sessions of the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rory, for your support and for Canada's support. I would like to ask maybe one last question. There is a question to Radia. Do you have any details as to when the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC will decide on the communication submitted by ECCHR and others, including Amnesty International? I don't know if anyone has an answer from the panel.
It's including Muatana, actually. I hope so.
So I believe we don't have more details on that. Maybe if we can have very short concluding observations from the panel, if that is possible, starting maybe with RD and going through the same way as we did in this session.
Thank you so much, Neda, and thank you to all participants and speakers at today's event. As I said, on behalf of members of the group of eminent experts, we remain committed so long as the members of the Human Rights Council remain committed to vest us with the authority and our mandate. We remain committed to our mandate to investigate and report upon violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law and other relevant international law in the conflict in Yemen. More than that, we remain committed to telling the story of the people in Yemen, the people of Yemen and the civilians in Yemen, to telling that story long, far, and wide. there are very few folks in the world who are keeping Yemen alive on the international agenda, and we view that as a very important aspect of our work. So we look forward to working with you, NGO partners, and other member states of the United Nations as well in this regard, and we thank you for your support.
Radia, would you like to give any observations?
I'm really glad that the accountability call is now very popular. I remember that everyone maybe remember in 2017 and before, it was not even there. It happened because of the collective work of everyone. And I believe that the Human Rights Council this year, and especially this year, is really to create the accountability mechanism, accountability focused mechanism for investigation. And I hope they will not let us down. They will not push us to the General Assembly, and they will just do it.
Thank you everyone for all your remarks. Really grateful to be here. And if I have like just a concluding message, I have two messages actually. One for Yemenis and one for the international community. I think since I'm like in contact with many of people who are like witnesses, victims, survivors, I just want to say that continue raising your voice because your silence will not protect you. Even condemning the lack of the international community interest and ensuring accountability in Yemen, just continue denouncing that. I think Yemenis should really have their voice louder and louder and louder and never give up. And the message for the international community, I just like knowing how we survived, well, we are still surviving the COVID pandemic. I think it was a powerful reflection how the world is just a small place and how everyone is affected with one virus going all around the world, and how if one place is not protected, the other are not also, and we cannot continue living in isolation. So I really think that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And in that regard, I think most of the states should be in the right side of history and ensure that justice is respected anywhere, because that will be, if it's violated, you will be next. Thank you.
And it's hard to follow all of these very eloquent concluding remarks, but I think maybe I could just draw on something, and I'm surprised there wasn't a question on this because I feel we were all maybe anticipating something like this on the question of timing. Is this the right time or the wrong time to have this conversation? And frankly, that question is not very relevant because the path to sustainable peace is really necessarily contingent on justice and accountability. And the time is frankly long past for paving that way. There are far too many obstacles for the people of Yemen to achieve justice and redress, and it'll basically render sustainable peace impossible if the status quo continues. So this demands political will from both the parties to the conflict and the international community. The mandates of the Human Rights Council, the UN General Assembly, and the UN Security Council really sort of should be a call to action. Should have been happening a long time ago, but now is the time to seize their mandates. Thanks.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Luke if you wanted to have any concluding observations.
Thanks very much. No, just to thank everybody who participated. It's your voices that need to be heard, not necessarily those of diplomats who conduct their business in shady back rooms and try to get the best deal out for everyone. But I do have a message for anyone who's listening in Geneva and who will work on the resolution that should make sure that the GEE can work, that should hopefully incorporate also all the requests that you've now addressed to us concerning accountability and an accountability mechanism. And that's actually the message from Desmond Tutu, who some time ago said that if you are neutral in a situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. And I'd like to end with that.
Thank you very much to all the panelists and all the contributions. I think the message is very clear by all organizations and by all panelists. The situation really requires support and political will, and we are really looking forward to working with the core group on the resolution you mentioned, Luke, and on advancing accountability and enhancing accountability for Yemen. And we look forward to the informals and to others, and for the realization of this important objective, which is the creation of such a mechanism that will help bring justice to Yemenis. Thank you very much to everyone who watched this session, and for the panelists to sticking to the speaking time, as we were able to finish on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.